When we see an addict, laying in the corner of the street somewhere, just remember, they are seeking for God just as much as you are. Now, you might have balanced yourself in a different way, but essentially there's no difference between the addict on the street who's completely out of it, hooked up to heroin, and the peaceful, beautifully joyful meditator. Every single one of you listening here is addicted by nature. You are all addicts. I am an addict. You shouldn't try to stop your addiction, because that's the same as trying to stop seeking for God. It's the same as trying to stop seeking to know yourself. That innate seeking impulse, as I call it, is indestructible. It's your lifeline to God. Welcome, everyone. Can you hear me? All right, let's take a deep breath. Start with a short meditation. And relax. Take another deep, slow breath in. And release. Take one more deep, calm breath in. Hold. And relax. All right, breathe normally. And take a moment to recognize the fact that we are all present here now. Start with your own experience. Simply noticing the body. The body is always a good anchor point for the here and now. It's a good entrance point into the real here and now, which is timeless, which is ultimately not of the body. It's not of this world. It's not of the perceptions that we see around us. But since the body is always here with us, and the breath is always here with us, it can function like a door, like an anchor point, a stable point of focus, as well as a door that we can open to a deeper presence, a deeper awareness that is of a more timeless nature. So simply start by noticing the body being here and now. Simply acknowledge the fact that you hear my voice without any effort on your part. Naturally, my voice is appearing to your consciousness. It's part of the same field that your body appears within, your sensations, your thoughts. It is all permeated by this presence, this field of awareness. Take another deep breath. Relax into the presence of the body being here and now. And deeply relax and release. And now extend your awareness of presence to every other life participant here today, just to briefly activate a glimpse of unity, a sense of togetherness with like intent, with like mind, with like heart, and feel the camaraderie, or at least the rich potential of camaraderie that exists in all these beautiful beings, all these extensions of your ultimate self, your ultimate source, seeking the same thing, seeking the freedom, the bliss of home, the bliss of source. And we're doing this now through this magnificent technology that has been very recent on our planet, allowing us to gather from wherever we are. We don't have to go on arduous walkabouts, all we have to do is turn on our laptops, sign in, and be present. It's pretty remarkable, actually. So just a brief acknowledgement in your consciousness of the presence of all the beings that are here to further amplify this field of togetherness, this field of congruency in seeking, congruency in intention, alignment as to why you decided to tune in today, as have your fellow friends on this live stream. I thank you all for being here. And today's topic is the science and mechanics behind bliss. Part of this is going to be energetic transmission. Part of this is going to be intellectual discourse. And usually with my sessions, in case you are new here, you will find there is that blend of both, which appeals to two different aspects within us as seekers. One is just simply that energetic, what to call it, transmission or radiance that you can tune your tuning fork to by being present to me, to my voice, and kind of inquiring or intuiting, where is this apparent guy speaking from? What is his experience? What is he seeing right now as he's transmitting about the topic of bliss? What is his state? What does he have access to? Simply by being receptive and present to my presence, you can begin to impart this same access on yourself. You can begin to open those same doors, those same access points, very naturally, very effortlessly. For some, this sounds like woo-woo or spiritual whatever, but actually it comes quite natural to everyone. We are all mimicking our environment all the time. We are all playing spiritual SpongeBob all the time. We are always absorbing what we see. We're always amplifying what we are aware of. If you are aware of someone who's not feeling so well, who's a little upset with you, who's resentful, you're going to feel that frequency. And unless you're a master, you're going to take on that frequency to some extent, sometimes to a great extent. Similarly, if you're in the room with someone who's really present, maybe even present to the God state, present to the true self, capital S, timeless, formless, free, unaffected, stable, peaceful, wise, loving, and so on and so forth, who is naturally in tune with that deepest natural state through practice, through their devotion, through their surrender, through their faith, through their sacrifice, through their passion, through their seeking, and finally through their realization. Then similarly, you will absorb that state. You will begin to, at least subconsciously, mimic or resonate with that frequency if you allow yourself to do so. So that's one aspect of these sessions. And the other is intellectual or logic, helping you understand the mechanics of what I'm actually transmitting and what I experience and what you can experience or know or glimpse as well. And so to me, this happens simultaneously. It's very rare that the intellectual discourse aspect of my sharing, that in other words, the speaking and the laying out certain foundations and understanding so that you can kind of get your mind on board with what your heart is absorbing and realizing. That aspect to me happens simultaneous to the transmission. Now I can amplify or emphasize the discourse, focus more, or I can emphasize the beingness or the radiance or the transmission aspect more, and so can you. But they are happening simultaneously. And I never feel good teaching something that is intellectual without the transmission part. I can't feel good just being. I can just be in a room, be in a party where nobody knows even what I do, or that I perhaps have a state of consciousness that is maybe different or more peaceful than most. And then I can just radiate and be completely happy. But I cannot teach, I cannot speak, I cannot provide you with discourse without the transmission feeling synced up with that or in alignment with that. I don't like the feeling of it. It's rare that it happens. And so I want you to understand that there are these two aspects that you can tune into simultaneously or both independently, however you wish. And I give you this disclaimer because I'm about to explain some things that are more intellectual. They're more about understanding. They're more about creating an accurate picture in your mind that can function as a roadmap that you, once you get it, you can use as a roadmap to gauge your experiences by, to help you understand, why am I experiencing this? What is it? At what level, so to speak, is this? Is this good guidance? Is it not guidance? Is it trustworthy? Is it not? Should I amplify it? Should I not indulge it? And so on. So my friends, specifically to the topic of bliss, I think the clearest, easiest way to distinguish the different levels of bliss, if you will, and to help you fine-tune this and distinguish this in your own experience, which is all that matters at the end of the day, because that is what you are seeking for. The easiest system that I've already expounded upon, which I will briefly reference again in this call, but I will not go in depth because I have several talks available also for free out there on YouTube, I think, pretty sure, on this topic. And this is the topic of the bodies. And for those of you who watched episode 4, which I think the team, that's the one the team just released on YouTube a couple days ago, Changing Your Deepest Assumptions, I also briefly recapture the physical body, the subtle body, or you could roughly call it the mental or energetic body or plasma body or electromagnetic body, if you will. Then there is the causal body, and then there's the great causal body, which essentially is equal to what I also call the God state, that most natural, formless state of awareness, love, light, or what they call in India, Satchitananda, or at least the quality of that, the predominant quality of that state that releases in your experience is that of Satchitananda, which means consciousness or awareness, beingness or existence or truth, and bliss, Ananda, being the word for bliss, the term for bliss. Now, it's helpful if you already know about these bodies. If not, it doesn't matter too much. You can still very much follow along with this session because I will give some necessary context. But if you want to understand these bodies more in depth, go watch the episode 4 that you can also find in MU under, what's it called again? Watch the sessions? Watch the recordings. So let's get into it. The physical body. So basically, I'm going to address how bliss is experienced so you can compare it to your own experience and you can create a frame of reference for it in your own mind. I'm going to address bliss at the level of each of these bodies, each of these levels of subtlety. And so you will see that the real bliss, which we'll get to, or the more ultimate bliss, the true bliss, if you will, how it gets interpreted or how it bounces off of these bodies in a different way. In other words, your physical body has a bliss receptor, if you will, or a bliss regulator. It has a way of reflecting upon the real bliss. It has a way of, if you picture the real bliss kind of like a beam of light coming from the sun, and your different bodies, the different levels of your bodies, which again, if you don't know what I'm talking about, I'll get into it in a little bit. But every body, so let's say your physical body, has a mechanism, it has an innate intelligent system that is able to receive that sunlight, the true bliss of God, if you will, the true bliss of Source, and bounce it off of its own sort of mirror-like surface. Or you could say the physical body has a way of interpreting that ultimate bliss. And then that expresses itself, to get right into it, the physical body's version of bliss would be pleasure. So, as you can sort of already deduce, this is why many people seek for pleasure, why we become pleasure addicts. By the way, there's nobody in the world that is not an addict. Every single one of you listening here is addicted by nature. You are all addicts. I am an addict. And so the thing is, it doesn't matter. You shouldn't try to stop your addiction, because that's the same as trying to stop seeking for God. It's the same as trying to stop seeking to know yourself. That innate seeking impulse, as I call it most often, is indestructible. It's your lifeline to God. So when we see an addict, laying in the corner of the street somewhere, hooked up to heroin and completely out of it, and we judge them as addicts, just remember, they are seeking for God just as much as you are. Now, you might have balanced yourself in a different way. You may have learned to seek for home, for truth, for freedom, for bliss in perhaps more appropriate or more balanced things or areas of life or hopes and dreams and so on. But essentially, there's no difference between the addict on the street who's completely out of it, hooked up to heroin, and the peaceful, beautifully joyful, radiant, calm meditator. Now, obviously, there's a difference in their experience, but I'm saying there's no difference in the addictive nature of the seeker. So the addiction is simply an expression of the seeking impulse. You cannot get rid of that. So one person might be seeking pleasure in the physical body because that's their best reference point for the bliss of God or the bliss of true self, freedom. While another, perhaps one of you guys who have been properly educated and instructed, and you have the know-how, you have the context of these teachings, which makes you one of the 0.001% of the world, of most privileged people. I don't care if you're black, gay, straight, male, female, rich, poor. You are part of the 0.001% of most privileged people if you have context and understanding for life itself, for seeking, for awakening, for true self-realization. So just appreciate that for a second, that you have this gift, this grace bestowed upon you, so to speak, this opportunity. Okay, it's very, very, very rare still. In a mainstreamish way, it's becoming more available, but it's still very rare to really have this type of knowledge available to us. That's why this kind of technology is so beautiful, and we're going to expand upon this and pay it forward. All of you guys are going to pay it forward just by your own experience. All right, enough of my tangent. Bliss. When bliss gets reflected in the physical body, it is experienced as pleasure. Okay. Took a couple of notes before this call, and let me just reference those. I might flesh them out later and post them somewhere in the university. So I'll give you a summary first of how bliss, the 5 abodes of bliss, I called it, the 5 primary abodes of bliss. So one would be the physical bliss, which feels like pleasure and can also feel like an elevated mood. Then there's the subtle bliss, which feels like gratification or satisfaction. When you have a deep sense of being gratified, nourished, accomplished, your satisfaction, that is the subtle body's interpretation of the true bliss. The causal bliss, the causal body, the causal bliss feels like a peaceful joy and profound relief. The great causal bliss, which is a fancy term, but really it stands for the substratum of all that is, the essence of manifestation. It's what I more often call the God state, or simply awareness, or the I am, and so on. So the great causal bliss feels illuminating, transcendent, and sometimes overwhelming to the other bodies. As if you stepped into the bright, enlightened presence of God. And then finally, absolute bliss is indescribable, for it transcends all feelings. The closest that words can get is that it, quote unquote, feels like an infinite, complete, universe transcending, timeless perfection. One of the ways I am addicted, for instance, you could say, it's just a manner of speaking, but you get the point. You could say I'm a perfectionist. I've always been a bit of a perfectionist. And so for me, what that indicates is that what I've always been seeking is this level of bliss, which is the great perfection. It's the perfection beyond everything. It's where there is not a single flaw. There is not a single error in anything. There's not a single mistake in anything. There's nothing that is suboptimal. And so naturally always having had a strong seeking impulse for source ever since I was young, anything that then was not representative of that perfection would, quote unquote, annoy me or inspire me to perfect it or to fix it or to change it or to work at it or be inspired to create something more holistic, pure, complete, perfect, and so on. So in a sense, the perfectionist, just to name one example of how addiction or seeking expresses itself in different personalities. Basically, the perfectionist is finding when they bump into something that's not perfect, it somehow instinctively reminds them that they're not seeking in the right place for God, that they're not, it's like an offense to the truth. It's like offending God. When something is imperfect, it's kind of interpreted as this thing, which is not perfect when it could be, hypothetically, is offending the truth of creation, the truth of existence. And therefore, it's not complete. Therefore, my seeking continues. That's just one example again. Okay, so we have these 5 bodies. Physical bliss feels like pleasure, and usually that comes with an elevated mood. The subtle body bliss feels like gratification or satisfaction. The causal body bliss feels like a peaceful joy or relief. The great causal bliss or the God bliss, which you could argue is the true bliss, feels illuminating. It's like a great light enters your awareness. It's like a brightness. The brightness of awareness itself becomes present, and it's like you're bathing in the essence of God. And this is really where the bliss takes on a high spiritual mass. It's a massing spiritual mass, density, denseness, the denseness of brightness. So not the denseness of matter, but high density of brightness, of light, of self-knowledge, self-awareness. It comes with a pristine clarity. So when you become aware of the brightness of awareness itself, even if just for 2 to 5 seconds, you are effectively beginning to tune your physical body, your subtle or mental body, and your unconscious or causal body. It's like you're tuning those mirrors upwards, so to speak, to reflect upon the brightness of God, the true nature, the bliss nature, the love nature of God's primordial energy, of I am, of beingness. So when you tune your vehicles like that, just like when you point a mirror at something, you're going to be reflecting, that something's going to be reflected in your body if you see your bodies as mirrors at different levels of energy. So if you are tuning your physical body, let's say you go sit down and meditate, take a deep breath, relax, and so on, and you tune the intention of your mind to have a recognition of the perfection of God, for instance, or of the brightness, the all-pervading nature of that great oneness. And you become sort of quiet and still, and you instinctively, intuitively also begin to sense that. You're gearing up the causal body to turn its mirror back towards its own source, its own higher self. Then these mirrors can become aligned, so to speak, and all become reflective of that pure bliss, which then translates as peace and relief, deep peace and relief in the causal body, as great satisfaction and gratification in the mental body, and then pleasure, calm, comfort, harmony within the physical body and your moods. So that would be if all the bodies aligned to this. So we're all familiar with physical pleasure. This is not rocket science. But why it's so appealing to us often eludes us. We don't understand that actually what we're seeking is source when we're seeking for pleasure. And the seeking for pleasure happens quite automatically. Examples of this are when you take caffeine or nicotine, or essentially any kind of drug that kind of changes your hormonal releases and your neurotransmitter processes. So those neurotransmitters and those hormones are essentially the quote-unquote bliss receptors within the physical chemical body. And so that's why we seek for substances, because it gives us this little microscopic or microcosmic representation of the real bliss that we're truly seeking. But that's also why it never truly satisfies us. And it's always got a down, after the up or after the high, there's a valley, there's a down. So obviously we want to raise our vision here. We want to seek for bliss and understand how to access it at those higher levels, which I'll get into in a little bit. Now, the mental bliss, the bliss reflected in the mental body, examples of this would be if you've just accomplished something. You struggle towards it, maybe you're a rock climber or something, and there's this difficult route, and you've been working on it for 2 months, and finally you make it to the top. Then there is that release, which also translates to the body. Obviously, the body will respond to this mental gratification and satisfaction with its own bliss receptors or regulators, such as neurotransmitters, hormones, and so on, dopamine, serotonin. These things are going to be released into the body. So that physically, you will also feel great. You will also feel like your mood is super high. But it starts mentally. It starts at a subtle level where something clicks in your perspective. You're defining that this moment is a moment of reward, or it's a moment of perfection, no matter how brief, that it's a moment of completeness, of completion, of accomplishment, of satisfaction. And so in the subtle body, you will feel greatly at ease. You will feel empowered. You will feel, gratification, satisfaction. And you could say this is a certain kind of bliss. It feels blissful. So those are just some examples. But you can also have a more mundane experience, perhaps, or an everyday experience, such as maybe you've had an argument with your partner for a while and it's felt unresolved for a few days. And now finally something clicked for both of you, and you found what you were both sort of looking for. You came to an understanding. Then mentally also, you are subconsciously defining that situation as more perfect than when there was disharmony. And because now the definition is released, because you're literally in that moment defining it as, now it's good. Life is good now. It's not that it's actually better than it was before. Yes, energetically, there's more harmony, there's more resonance. So if you want to call that better, scientifically or objectively, go ahead. But actually, objectively, even disharmony or harmony is not better or worse. It's just a different state of creation. However, in our minds and in the energy field, there's more resonance, there's harmony, and we're defining it as accomplishment, as success, as harmony, as an understanding, as unity having been reestablished. Or our desires are now here, whereas before that, what we desired, we defined as if it was lacking. We were telling ourselves subconsciously, again, the subtle body is equivalent of the subconscious mind. The physical body is the equivalent of the physical mind, of the conscious mind, the conscious realm. And the causal body, the third, is representative of what we typically call, in our Western society at least, the unconscious level. So at the subconscious or subtle or mental level, when we define a particular moment as being fulfilling, as containing what it is that we want, as opposed to how we often go through life, which is subconsciously defining, framing everything we see as being in lack of what we see, or in lack of what we think we desire. But when that dialogue finally flows, and there is harmony, and there is intimacy that's been reestablished, and the energies between the bodies in that room are reharmonizing, and there's a sense of connection, maybe even a sense of opening up to the higher levels of bliss, especially if you're spiritually sensitive or trained, then that can translate to the subtle body as, satisfaction, gratification. I have what I've been desiring. And then the body usually generates more energy, your moods are uplifted, and so on and so forth. Now this causal body, the causal body's bliss feels like peace or a peaceful joy and relief. Think about the statement that we have, ignorance is bliss. Because the causal body is in the East described both as the body of ignorance, or simply as ignorance, as well as bliss. One term they use for this is Anandamaya, sorry, that's a lot of A's. Anandamaya kosha, and kosha meaning body, or like a sheath, like a veil, like a container, like a vehicle. So Anandamaya kosha, meaning the body or sheath of bliss. But it's also referenced as the level of ignorance. And so in the West, we often say ignorance is bliss, but we don't really realize how true that is, mechanically speaking, scientifically speaking, at least metaphysically, scientifically speaking. Because, again, the causal body is that deep, space-like room that's essentially, to us at least, from our physical incarnate state, it feels like it's the unconscious realm of our being. For instance, when we're physically awake, that would be the physical body's operational system. When we are sort of dreaming, even daydreaming, that's the subtle body. That's the subconscious mind kind of playing and imagining in its subtle realm. But we don't often recognize the causal realm because it's too deep, and so we call it unconscious. Actually, it's too high. It's actually higher in vibration than the physical and the subtle. But because we're not really hardwired within this physical realm to have a full awareness of that, it appears to our conscious minds, which are of a lower vibration, as if it is the unconscious, or as if it is below the conscious, but it's actually above the conscious. But it's so far above the conscious mind for most people that it's unconscious to them. So you see, we've mislabeled the causal body. We should actually call it superconscious. We should call the conscious mind conscious, the subtle body very conscious, and the causal body superconscious. But we've called it conscious because we always think we're, the top dog of everything. So we've demoted the very conscious to subconscious because we're not quite as aware of it. And then we've denoted the superconscious because we can't even grasp that with our little pea brains. So we've projected it downwards and we call it the unconscious sleepy mind. But actually, in truth, and in many of these systems refer to the causal body as actually being your soul, the seat of your soul. It's your soul body. It's that body that transmigrates through different expressions, through different subtle and physical bodies. In other words, incarnations, different dimensions, journeys, lessons, themes, lives, and so forth. So roughly, the causal body, it's not just a dark room. It's not just a dark space that you're not really aware of. Equivalent to deep sleep. When you're in your deep sleep state, it's like you're unconscious, but you're not really. You're actually resting back to a more soul-like level beyond this physical incarnation, beyond all this moving, physical, and subtle stuff. So it's roughly the equivalent of your soul. It's like the body that would be the equivalent of your soul. Now, it's not the truth. It's just another expression. It's just another vehicle for truth. It's not yet the true bliss, but the way that bliss is experienced through the causal body, and you will recognize this, even though you call it unconscious, you will recognize this type of bliss. It's the bliss of total relief. That's why if someone uses, let's say, enough drugs or knocks themselves out with sleeping pills or whatever, or just deep sleep, there's that deep peace of relief. At least initially it's relief, and then it's just a deep peace. It's the peace of the absence of all the things you were so worried about. It's the absence of the world. It's the absence of your responsibilities. It's the absence of your relationships and your worries and your concerns and your bank accounts and your timelines and your deadlines. So when you find in deep meditation, for instance, when you find this threshold of the mental body and go beyond it, so you're noticing, hey, I'm aware of the physical body. And then you notice, wait a second, there's also this mental body that's kind of interacting with my physical body. It's kind of thinking and dreaming and imagining and hoping and fearing. And the physical body responds to that in form of either stress or relaxation and sort of a bliss release like pleasure. Or it can be really anxious and feel like the opposite of bliss. So the physical body responds to what I think. So there is a mental body that is deeper or more subtle, or you could also say higher in vibration than my physical body. It is connected to my physical body, but the physical body is kind of like a creature of my mind, right? It's the expression of the mind. So in meditation, for instance, you notice that your mind is aware of your body, and that if your mind is chaotic, the body will feel restless. And if your mind kind of calms down and becomes more aware of itself, now the body starts to auto-regulate itself in a much more harmonious fashion. So you're observing this for a little bit in meditation. And then you notice, but when I stop thinking, in other words, when I stop engaging with my mental body or my subtle body, what then remains? What do you feel like you automatically kind of drop into in your meditation when you reach the edge of the thinking mind and drop beyond it? And for many people, this feels kind of like dropping into a space or into an abyss or into a room without lights, without a world, without objects, without thoughts or concerns. And it's like a deep, dark stillness or a vacancy. So you can see why it's also been referenced as the body of ignorance, because it's ignorance is bliss. In this state, you don't know anything. You know that state like a deep sleep while you're awake. But you don't, in that state, you don't see any worldly objects. You're not concerned with your thoughts and emotions. It's a deep peace or relief. And this can be said to be blissful. It is the bliss of forgetfulness. We forget the world and we abide in sort of this blank state of being.
Massaro University is a vibrant online community dedicated to accelerating your awakening and activating your purpose for the benefit of all. Join live sessions with Bentinho and workshops led by experienced facilitators. Deepen your wisdom, empowerment, and self-knowledge, and experience life-changing shifts week after week. At Massaro University, finding like-hearted seekers is easy and inevitable. Lifelong friendships and a shared purpose fuel profound personal and collective growth. Create your free account today at massaro.university and step into a community that's designed to elevate every aspect of your life.
Now, the more time we spend here and the more we illuminate it with an even higher awareness, the more this deep dark space is revealed to be a very potent soul-like vehicle or body. But that's the more advanced stages. For the most part, to us, the causal body feels like it's empty, feels like it's a blank, feels like it's the deep space which holds all the seeds of the thoughts that sprout in the subtle body and that come to full manifestation in the physical world. Okay, so the bliss in the causal body is experienced as deep peace, restfulness, deep rejuvenation, restoration, relief from the world. Okay, so physical body, mostly pleasure and elevation in mood. The subtle body, gratification, nourishment, satisfaction, happiness because we're defining something, we're seeing something as being accomplished or in alignment or more harmonious. Feels like harmony, kind of like a joy, not a very, very profound joy, more like an elevated joy, like a expressive joy, like a happiness. Like I feel good, I'm happy, things are going so well for me. I'm gratified, I'm satisfied. The deep causal, the causal body, which you visit every night in deep sleep, except you do it mostly unconsciously, is that peace of forgetfulness, where ignorance is bliss. The world is not known to you. It's the bliss of sleep, basically. It's relief. It's peace. And now we get to the true bliss, to which all these three bodies are responding in their own way. And this is the great causal body bliss, which again is just a borrowed term from the East to denote God in its most essential state of being, its original condition. Or if you don't like the word God, you could say your true nature, your true self, that bright awareness, that living presence, that living sentient principle of being, which is highly aware. If you're able to tap into that level more directly, again, you already do it when you have a piece of chocolate, there's a dopamine release or whatever, you're in a very minuscule way tapping into the bliss of God, and it's translated physically. But if you are able to, in a sense, go beyond these three bodies by turning your attention directly onto its own essence, which we typically refer to as awareness. But it's this brightness of the living principle or presence of God, of you. Another word for God is me, M-E, capital M, capital E. You're me, or capital U. So if you find your innermost knowingness of me, of the fact that I am, so for you, that you are, your innermost sense of you. That is, if you can tune into it properly, is the equivalent of tuning into God. AKA be still, which is the causal body level, and then know that I am God. You know the famous statement, be still and know I am God. So yes, be still, causal body, so you're not distracted by the endless restlessness of trying to attain satisfaction or pleasure in the physical and subtle bodies. You've given that a rest. You're in the bliss of forgetfulness. Forgetfulness of what? Forgetfulness of the world. It's the bliss of ignorance, of deliberate ignorance, of just resting in the absence of imagination. And in that deep stillness, be still. Now the next step is to know that I am God. And how you do that is when you're in that moment of stillness and peace, or in any other state really, but it's perhaps easiest when you're in stillness. And you're in this sort of blank, empty space that you might mistake for true emptiness or true God or the absolute, which it is not. It's a deceiving body in that sense. But when you're in that seemingly empty space container, that depth of being without consciousness of the world and the mind, just deep sense of peaceful abiding. Now, it's like you turn the light on in the background by recognizing, wait a minute, okay, there is this sense of peace, there is this body of ignorance, there's this state of blank, of peace, but There is something that is aware of this. Just that. That's all you need to do. You're there, you're in the stillness. And then you ask yourself, or you notice, you don't even have to ask yourself, because that can reactivate the subtle body. But just recognize the plain truth in your experience that you cannot deny, that there is an awareness from somewhere, from someone, from somehow. Somehow there is an awareness of this peaceful state of stillness. And by then turning your attention upwards or towards the container of awareness, which is witnessing the peaceful state of the causal body, now you're subtly finding that switch in your consciousness that turns on the light of God. And if you can find that switch, and you can, and you begin to activate that switch, begin to recognize the brightness, the knowingness nature of awareness, the witnessing presence of Source in your direct experience. This is when it is like you're bathing in the presence of an omnipresent, all-encompassing oneness. Now this is the real peace, or this is the real energy of bliss. And this is where it can be, in a sense, almost too bright to bear. This is where it can feel overwhelming, usually in a good sense. But then sometimes you almost feel like you kind of have to come down from that, like your physical, subtle, and causal bodies can't quite handle the brightness for very long. And that's okay. You get adjusted to it over time. You get acclimatized to it over time. But see if you can find this switch in your consciousness of noticing that something is aware of my present experience. Therefore, your attention is being placed in the source of attention, which is awareness. Awareness aware of itself, you could say. Just for brief moments, just highlighting the brightness. You notice right now, something is so brightly hearing my voice, vividly. And so you learn to amp up the brightness, the recognition of awareness. And that compounds, and it compounds, and you will feel in the body is like it's like this power, like you're plugged into the universe, and there's this powerful current that's going through your body. This presence, this almost like this electromagnetic / gravitational feeling. And it can express itself in different ways for different people, depending on their balances, their distortions, their energy centers, their harmonies, and so forth. But in general, in the pure sense, at least how I experience that, is that it's as if this light, like an invisible, bright light that has a magnetic and electromagnetic gravitational quality to it as well, is pressing down into my body in a subtle kind of a waterfall of electromagnetic light type of a way. And this can put almost like a metaphysical pressure on the body. Not like a heaviness, though. It feels good. But it is a very powerful energy. And the body and the mind may need to adjust to this over time. Or they do actually need to adjust to this over time, because the circuitry of the physical body, the hormonal makeup, the bliss receptors in each of these bodies, so to speak, they're not quite used because they've been abused by other types of consciousnesses within ourselves, with other levels of consciousness, with distortions, painful thinking, and so on, constant mood swings. So when we finally tune into the pure light of God, as it was meant to be, so to speak, it needs to reconfigure these bodies. And it does that. It does that as rapidly as it possibly can if you give it that frequent moment of recognition, backing off only when it feels like it's too much. And then you relax. Then you go to forgetfulness, or you go into imagination, or you go into the physical world. That's fine. But then again, you remember when you feel kind of decompressed from that, like you've recovered from your spiritual gym time, so to speak, go back into the spiritual gym. Recognize, again, this brightness of awareness that's always aware of whatever you are experiencing, whether it's physical, subtle, or causal. There is this great causal body that's like the bright, vivid, formless, light-like container of all experiences. It's the basis of everything you can ever experience. But notice its brightness. Notice its vividness. Notice its lucidity, its clarity, its vividness, its brightness. Keep noticing that. And your bodies will then become more receptive to the presence of God, which is essentially what you're practicing. It's the presence of I am, the presence of God, the presence of oneness. Over time, it will cleanse your vision and reveal the world as one with Source. This is where the true bliss is. This is where the, the spiritual woo-woo bliss that people think you're insane or crazy if you're showing that you're experiencing that. Now, over time, again, this stabilizes, this normalizes itself so that you can experience quite high levels of vibratory, light and bliss, while still seeming somewhat normal or conventionally approvable. So for instance, I could be at a party with muggles, no offense, people that are unaware of any of this. And I could raise my bliss. I could tune all my bodies in a moment of will. And I can do it I tried to measure it once, but it's pretty much instantaneous. The moment I decide to tune into bliss, to tune my bodies to bliss, it's pretty much instantaneous. I couldn't quite get to 1/10 of a second. And then, so immediately the effects begin. So let's say that I'm at a party with people that are not into this kind of self-realization stuff, because why would they bother? They've got all these substances that give them that 0.001% of the real bliss by just taking it in their mouths. They don't have to sit still. They don't have to know who they are. They can just be as messed up as they are, be as addicted to all the substances as they are, and still get their little hits of bliss. They are satisfied, sort of, in their subtle body. So anyway, and it's still no offense. It's whatever. People are ready for what they're seeking at that stage in their journey. There's no judgment here. I'm just kind of pointing out what I mean. So then, let's say that I'm at a party like that, and I for some reason decide, hey, you know what? It'd be fun to raise my bliss levels. So I go and charge up, kind of like, for those aware of Dragon Ball Z, you go Super Saiyan 2, and then you go Super Saiyan 3, and then you go Super Saiyan God. So it's kind of like charging up, except without all the screaming that they do in that anime. So you just turn up your bliss levels. You tune your physical body, subtle body, and causal body, and you don't have to think about it in this way. It just becomes intuitive. It just becomes your will. It just becomes what you do with your attention. The bodies will naturally follow your will, your intention, and your surrender. Whatever you're surrendered to in that moment, especially with great will or intentionality or devotion, the bodies will be naturally, those mirrors will naturally be tuned to and point to, become reflective of that which you are devoted to in that moment. So if you tell me to raise my bliss levels, I will immediately begin to raise my bliss levels. And you can start to feel, if you're sensitive, you can start to feel my body's getting attuned to that. And then that's just an act of will at this point. It's just wanting to bump up that frequency. If I were to do this at a party with people that are not aware of this kind of stuff, I can now, unless I take it too high, then maybe not, but I can go fairly high and keep a normal, interactable appearance. I can have a conversation. I can be aware of whatever they're sharing and their potential issues or the way that they view things in the world and how they turn things into problems. However, if you take this too high in such a social setting, you will reach a point where it's just overwhelmingly bright and you can't take anything seriously anymore. So someone might tell you something about how this terrible thing happened to them, And although you have complete compassion and love for them in your heart, if you're actively attuning your bodies to the bliss of God, well, you can kind of imagine what that's like. And when someone who's kind of sad and really believing in that moment that something is lacking and that something is wrong and that they have been betrayed by the universe and unfairly treated and they feel so emotionally distressed, and you bring them next to a being who is aware of the great perfection of all of life, and there's not a single problem in the world anywhere, and it's just this bright radiance of God, those are very different realities. So you're going to have to act serious in order to relate to them, for an instance, at least from their point of view. You don't need to do that for your sake, because you can relate to their pain, their suffering, you can understand that, even in your elevated state, although it will simply be outshone by that bliss. So usually if I'm at a party like that, I tone myself down a little bit. I'm happy, I'm very content, I'm aware of the bliss and so on. But I relate to people, and I have no problem shifting between these different foci points and becoming more serious and like relatable, if you will, and engaging with their experience where they're at, and then zooming back out when it's relevant to zoom back out. So over time, you become more and more adept at this. Why was I saying this? Because, oh yeah, because you don't just have to like, sit as if you're being electrocuted by God and be like, oh my God, so much bliss. It's fine if that happens for a phase and it's just your body sort of adjusting, but don't get lost in that in your mind. Don't get lost in that by turning it into something, by giving it a meaning or definition or spiritual significance or making that your identity. The sort of bodily shaking and the bodily blissing out. It's ultimately it's for some people necessary of the cleansing process, of the readjustment process, not for everyone. But it's ultimately not really an act of service to others, especially if it's distracting, if it's not understood, if it's not in the appropriate context. It's not for them, it's for yourself, right? So yes, to an extent, there is a necessary release and adjustment that happens in the bodies as you are able to recognize the bliss of God, the higher levels of bliss, the truer levels of bliss. But let not that adjustment phase turn into a concept in your mind or an ideology or a thing. Just stay relatable and learn how to bring yourself back down without losing your connection to Source. And then you can let your bodies uplift again. And then you can bring them down. And this is what the higher dimensional beings do if you believe in their existence. And even if you don't believe in their existence, it's still what they do. In order to relate to physical or materialize themselves, for instance, they have to bring down their vibration deliberately. So it's not their natural state, and it takes a certain form of focus and will and intentionality. You could say it takes some effort. Just like it would be for me at a party to really relate to someone perceiving all this lack in their lives when all I perceive is the abundance of their freedom and the opportunities for growth and the richness of God being present right now in a natural state of perfection. Like I have to sort of condense my bodies, lower my frequency to be able to really relate and have a relevant conversation with that person. So it's not my natural state. I don't surround myself with people like that because that would not be sustainable or nourishing. But to some degree, I do it with everyone that's around me. So, but at an even sort of higher level or a non-incarnational level, that's literally how, in order to become visible to a physical incarnate human being, an ascended master, for instance, that's no longer physical, or at least no longer bound to physicality, would have to condense their vibration in order to become visible to our particular virtual reality here in this sensory world. So just to give you a sense of that. So if you go too high, which is great, not too high, two is never great, I guess. But if you go really high, you will experience some of these adjustments effects. And like how am I going to relate to people now? And don't worry about it. You'll come back down again. Don't worry about it. Like it's very rare that someone would stay in a high state of bliss, and you would probably combust and or ascend if you're lucky, and it all goes appropriately. But for most people, it's a process of bumping up their faith, bumping up their will, bumping up their surrender, and therefore bumping up their vision of God and their bliss levels, so to speak, or their frequency. And by gradually doing that for short moments, many times, you get accustomed to it. Your system starts to rewire itself. The circuitry starts to upgrade and expand or become more nuanced, more subtle, more precise, more intelligent. Your system, energy system, and your physical body start to work smarter and become more able to harness more of that light, more of that energy. So that's, for most people, the sort of gradual journey of acclimatizing to bliss. Okay, now there's another distinction I want to make, which is the two conditions of bliss, the peaceful or stable condition and a euphoric or unstable condition. So even in each of these levels, up to the fourth, because God is always stable, but the other bodies have this adjustment phenomenon when they're first getting in touch with the bliss. Yeah, so I'll read some of this, and then I'll continue speaking freely from there. So there is the bliss as it naturally exists in its own domain. So let's say in the physical body, that would be a state of calm and peace and balance, a feeling of harmony, a feeling of ongoing hormonal balance, so to speak. In the East, they often call this the sattvic state. I think in the West, what comes pretty close to this, it doesn't cover all of it, but it's actually the state of ketosis. What that expresses on a physiological level is very much akin to that stable background feeling of peace and calm in the body, of balance, of clarity. And so that feels naturally pleasurable. It's not the same pleasure of like, sexual orgasm. It's not as acute as that, but it's like a constant, subtle background, calm, a clarity. It's what most people try to get from caffeine or nicotine or Adderall or what have you. But you can naturally more and more create this within your body, depending on what you ingest and what you expose yourself to environmentally, and obviously how you use your subtle body. So there's the bliss as it naturally exists in its own domain. Now, at the subtle level, that would be the bliss that just exists there is ongoing satisfaction, like an ongoing, natural satisfaction, like a sense of abundance, accomplishment all the time. On the causal level, this is that deep peace, this deep, consistent peace, freedom from worldly things, freedom from objects. It's the soul in its own native condition. And then at the God level, this stable bliss is that Satchitananda, or that love light awareness, that stable oneness that's always there. Okay, so those are the stable blisses, if you will, the stable levels of bliss in each of their domains. Now, we're also familiar with euphoria, being euphoric, right? So, or ecstatic, perhaps, having an ecstatic moment, or going to an ecstatic dance class, God forbid. No, not really. God allows for this, unfortunately. So there's the bliss as it naturally exists in its own domains, whether recognized and felt or not. That's the point here. Bliss exists whether you recognize it or feel it or not. And at that level, it's stable, it's balanced, and peaceful. Now, the euphoric condition or type of bliss is a release in one of the bodies, either the physical, subtle, or causal. So it's a release in one of the bodies in response to or as a reaction to a significant or often sudden contrast in experience or shift in focus. So if you suddenly go from a state of worry and concern, and you suddenly remember a teaching or something I said or a realization you've had before, and it sort of almost instantly shifts you out of that concern state, the lack state, you see, oh, I was thinking of it like it was lacking, but actually I see now. It's abundant, it's ever present. I cannot lack anything. This sort of sudden shift has a euphoria to it, because your subtle body and your physical bodies are suddenly going from a lower state to recognizing the bliss and the truth of God, the oneness, the perfection, all that. And suddenly those mirrors of the bodies turn and reflect the sunlight of God. And that instant contrast between a dark day in London versus a bright day at the equator, if you suddenly have that shift, it's like all the systems go, and we feel a release, we feel a reaction, we feel the contrast from bad to blissful. And this comes with a temporary sense of euphoria. And unfortunately, people start chasing the euphoria as if it's the real bliss. But it's a lesser condition. It's just a temporary response in the bodies to the actual bliss being now more fully received by the bodies. Okay, so it's a reaction. Euphoria is a reaction to a much greater degree of receptiveness to the real bliss, usually all of a sudden. If it's gradual, there's not so much euphoria. There's just a gradual, like, oh yeah, oh yeah. And it kind of stabilizes itself and it expresses itself as a calm and as a balanced state. An analogy for this between euphoria and a peaceful, stable bliss would be when you jump into a cold pool, your first 30 seconds of shock or sudden adjustment to the contrast in experience from the warm outside to the ice-cold pool is the analogous equivalent of the bliss which is of the condition of being euphoric. Whereas the condition you experience once your body has adjusted to the coldness of the water, as it always already was, the cold water, aka the bliss, was already stable. But you immersed yourself in this bliss. In other words, in the analogy, you immersed yourself in the cold water. So you had a response to it for the first 20, 30, 40 seconds. That's the equivalent of euphoria. When you respond to the bliss, oh my God, I'm ecstatic. And that's usually when people kind of lose their minds, go a little nuts and like start turning it into this beautiful thing. So, oh my God, I'm so amazing. And look at this. And oh my God, best sex I've ever had. And oh my God, ecstatic dance. Yay. Again next week, same time, please, because I want that hit. But once your body gets adjusted to the coldness of the water, now what comes over the body? You start to adjust to the stable piece. You start to become one with the coldness of the water, the bliss that's stable and there. And now the way that expresses itself in the body, once it's adjusted to it, and the contrast disappears, it's like this total nervous system calm, which in this analogy is the equivalent of the bliss which is peaceful, stable, or simply as it is. I already gave a great tool for how to activate bliss, for lack of a better word, or how to recognize and receive bliss, which is to emphasize, to take your attention off of the world, off of the objects, and instead notice the brightness of awareness, the vividness of the principle, the presence of God. Just noticing, reveling in that brightness, letting that saturate your bodies, giving it enough space and time to sort of create that contrast, that relief of dipping in that cold pool. So initially it might come with a sense of euphoria. I remember early on when I first started to sort of recognize that what I was seeking for was already here. So again, for reference, this was around the age of 18. And then I started to get adjusted to that, accustomed to that over the following years. But I remember there were a few phases where there were many nights where I would just lay down in my bed, stare at the ceiling, notice the bliss. Not even notice the bliss. I wasn't focused on the bliss. I was focused on the freedom. I was noticing the freedom, the awareness, the brightness, the freedom, the vividness, the formlessness of awareness. And I was just marveling at it. And then there would be so much euphoria and bliss getting accustomed to that I literally just could not fall asleep. But at the same time, there was no concern about that. For many days. I did sleep then some, but usually not at night when I was laying down looking at my ceiling. So I managed to get some sleep, but for many days in a row, I just was not able to sleep because I was looking at the ceiling and seeing free awareness. And so this was adjusting my mirrors or my bodies to that energy of bliss, of clarity. And so things like that can happen when you're acclimatizing to the natural bliss and while your bodies are upgrading. That's totally fine. Don't worry about it. You can always bring yourself back down. Like watch a movie, try to distract yourself, get tired and be like, oh, okay, have a full meal or something like that. Take a melatonin and then just, pass out for your maybe sustainability or health's sake. But there's nothing wrong with having some interesting adjustments happen to this bliss. You will know when it's triggered by the bliss because, well, you'll be experiencing the bliss. And it will be because of the bliss and the vibrancy that you're having trouble sleeping, for instance. So if it gets too extreme, then you might have to take some measures like trying to ground yourself and forget a little bit about the bliss. But it will all reconfigure itself with enough space and time. And you will get acclimated to that cold pool, if you will, that cool, joyful, bright bliss of God. Your bodies will get more and more accustomed to it and will be able to generate more and more energy, will be able to heal more and more people, to send love and light to more and more people, to take on more and more care and shepherding and responsibility for other people's well-being, of course, with that permission or agreement. So you will become able to truly be a shepherd naturally. You'll have the energy naturally more and more to do this.
Thank you for watching this Bentinho live session. Bentinho now hosts these transformative live sessions completely free, offering profound insights and guidance to support your journey. To attend the next live session with Bentinho, simply visit massaro.university and follow the instructions to create your free account.